just so we can cover that ground. Virtue you learn at your mother's knee. Vice you learn at some other joint. Enjoy that at your own pace. Before we start, Sean and I work really hard to bring you these kind of events, but it would be absolutely impossible to do it without the help of a lot of other folks. So I want to thank first our wonderful friends Ann and Bo and Patrick, who you all saw out front. Thank you guys. And also our fantastic tech crew, who you see wandering around and standing on tables, headed up by Nick Stein. Ben's over here, and Chris is in the back. If they fall and hurt themselves and have to be carted out, we want to thank them now for all their work. Also, just a quick shout out, those of you who don't know her, the person that does probably more than anybody else in the area for not only the local secular groups, but also the national secular groups is here. She'll be over on this microphone over here. Debbie Allen, raise your hand. Debbie Allen, who is a fantastic promoter of all the groups around. And also I want Dan. Dan, would you stand up? Dan Feldman. Dan has volunteered. There will be an after party. You'll hear more about it at the very end of the show. You are all more than welcome to come. It's at Bara Bara down in Old Town. Dan will be the person that's down there early to greet everybody, so look for him when you get down there if you're coming. Thank you, Dan. We're also thrilled to have, to my left here, Pam Fox with us on the panel, on this side of the panel, and Roy Whitaker, who is our moderator here in the middle. It's his show, and he'll be in charge. You'll get a more formal introduction on both of them and all of us shortly, but Sean and I just wanted to add our thanks to both of them for making the effort to come and be a part of this. And, of course, we want to thank our friends at the Church of God, particularly Patrick O'Shea, who's done so much work to help put this together, and Ernest, and all of the folks that we know from several months now from the Church of God. So we thank you all, and especially for all this equipment, putting all this equipment together. We really saved us a lot of effort. So thank you to all of you. And lastly, but not leastly, we want to extend our thanks to all of you. We want to thank you in advance for all your participation today. It's going to be audience participation mostly, and then panel discussion of the audience questions, so we thank you in advance for all of your help. A couple of real quick housekeeping items before we move on. The restrooms, for those of you who haven't found them yet, if you go out the door to the left, the women's will be on the left and the men's are on the right. Also, if you want to ask a question and you're in the first 3 rows, if you would just work your way to the outside row and go around the back, I think that would make it a lot easier for everybody to line up, since the microphones are about 4 rows back. So if you want to ask a question, you're in one of those front rows, just move to the outside and go around the back and come up. And we will try to alternate. So with that, I will hand it over to Roy. Cell phones off. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. I thought there were some church people in here. Good afternoon. Call and response. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for joining us for our Interfaith panel discussion. This is a discussion rather than a formal debate, as the goal is not to secure victory, but rather to achieve a more mutual understanding. This event today is being recorded and will be posted on the internet at the YouTube MABOOM Show channel. So, very importantly, ladies and gentlemen, your participation in this event therefore constitutes permission to post audio and video of you publicly. If anyone is uncomfortable with this, we will not be the least offended if you no longer want to participate. Okay. Everyone wants to be famous. To introduce our panelists, I would like to, first of all, start with our guests from the Church of God. Patrick O'Shea, Ernest Binion, Stephen Hargrave. And when we spoke a little bit right before the event got started, they were very simplistic in their answer in terms of how they wanted to be represented as ordained ministers in the Church of God and men who are saved, men who are saved. On the secular side, we have Sean Taylor, board member and treasurer of the Humanist Fellowship of San Diego, and he's the co-host of the Make a Believer Out of Me program. He's also the organizer of the regular Saturday Secular Outreach in the Park event in Balboa. Jim Eliason, who began the introductions today, is also an organizer of that event on Saturdays, and he also co-hosts the Make a Believer Out of Me show. Pam Culkin has a very wide background. She has a master's in poetics, master's in theology from Bethel Seminary, a PhD from UC Riverside, and she lectures in the Bible, world religions, classics, and humanities at San Diego State University. I should note that Pam and I are actually colleagues at San Diego State University. And in terms of my background, I teach one of the first courses in the States dealing specifically with atheism. And I also teach a course on Christianity as well. And in terms of my own religious or non-religious viewpoint, maybe I should share it with you this way. I explained to my father one time that in my world religions class, my students are constantly asking about what my religious views are. He told me, tell them good luck, because I don't even know what you believe. So I am, in this context, a neutral arbiter of the conversation, and I look forward to a really robust, lively, and engaging conversations with everyone here.
You're playing it safe, huh, Roy? Being the neutral one?
I'm reading what I was handed 5 minutes ago. Anyone and everyone is invited to ask questions of either set of panelists. My job as moderator is to make sure the questions are relatively brief and are actually followed by a question mark. Okay. So make sure you have a question somewhere in there. You can direct questions to either side of the panel or to both sides. If you ask a question of a particular side, that side will be allowed to answer, after which the other side will also be able to address the question. This will continue at my discretion as moderator until I believe we need to move on to the next question. Hopefully, we will not run out of questions, but if you're all shy, I have some questions and topics I will introduce, though I hope this is not necessary. Before we start, people in this room have a very desperate religious and political viewpoints. We encourage people to delve deeply into these religious differences with their questions, so don't be shy, and we expect some animated discussion. But we do ask that you remember the following guidelines. You do not have to agree with or even respect someone's point of view. However, we will insist that you do respect other people as fellow human beings, and you must always tolerate their ideas, whether you respect those ideas or not. Please keep your questions as concise as possible, as I mentioned before. Please be constructive with your comments or questions. In the interest of fairness, we will try to alternate Christian questions with secular questions and questioners. It will be my job as moderator to ensure that everyone is following this outline and to keep the discussion moving along until an allotted time is up. So let us get started, and we're ready to begin now.
We just want one at a time, though, please.
Please
Yeah,
come
just to the microphone,
please.
please.
Good afternoon. Thanks for hosting this event. My name is Wilfredo Perez, and I'm the Vice President of the Humanist Fellowship of San Diego. I'd like to ask the Christian side over here a question regarding the Bible. Christians often state that the Bible should be used as the basis of morality, and they also say that Jesus is all about love. Is that correct? Is that fair? All right, I have a specific question about one verse of the Bible that I'm very interested in. It's Luke 14:26. To paraphrase it, Jesus says that in order to follow me, you must hate your mother and father, your brother and your sister. Could you please explain this to me? It sounds like a very irrational, jealous, and crazy human being as far as I'm concerned. Thank you.
Could you repeat your reference? Luke 14?
Luke 14:26.
26. Thank you.
Luke 14:26 says, if any man come to me and hate not his father and mother and wife and children and brethren and sisters, yea, and his own life also, he cannot be my disciple. And the question was, I'm gathering what the question was, is that why is Jesus saying hate here if his burden for humanity is love, as Christians believe? And the answer is actually very simple. The word hate here, of course, the New Testament was written in the Greek language, and the word hate here simply means to love less. Jesus is not condoning hatred of anyone, racism, anything of that nature. It simply means to love less. In other words, God being supreme, you would love me supremely above everyone else. And that's simply the answer.
I would add to that a little bit. And I think that you can tell Jesus' meaning by his actions. And we find in the crucifixion account, as he's about to die, he looks to John and says, behold your mother. Or he shows he has a concern for his mother, that she be taken care of after that time period. So Jesus not only, as the brother explains in the Greek, says love less, but he also shows by example that he carries not only just a love for all humanity, but a particular love for his mother.
For the secular side, would they like to respond at all to this, what appears to be an enigma or a contradiction on the idea of a loving God on the one hand, and then there may be some biblical ambiguity about actions that are required in the Bible that seem to sort of contradict that, as it were. Do you ever find in your own conversations together this type of dissonance between sort of the conception of a loving creator God and this idea that Christians are asked to do something that seem to be not moral or anti-social norms? Do you ever bring that up into your conversations at all?
Yeah, for myself and the secularists that I know, there's always an issue with what is written in the Bible and how it is interpreted. For instance, it says in modern English, you must hate your mother, brother, father. It may have said something a little less hurtful or offensive in the ancient Greek. I'm not sure. What I do know is that's not the only line in the Bible that does say something offensive, that does say something hurtful, that does say something disgusting, morally speaking. And we do know in modern society today, the only argument that I know of, for instance, against an entire group of people for the way that they were born, the LGBTQ community is obviously what I'm speaking of, is from the Bible. And it is from the Old Testament, where they are called an abomination. If a man lies with another man as he would with a woman, it is an abomination. It further states, after a comma, that they should be stoned to death. That part, for some reason, is not being acted upon in modern society today, but the hatred of them is certainly being acted upon. The discrimination against the LGBT community is certainly being acted upon. I'm not certain that that's the case with the Church of God, but I do know that that is the case from the Bible and many believers in the Bible. There's countless numbers of things like this, which really offend someone like me that doesn't take it as a sacred holy text. For myself, when I see something like that, I think it's wrong and foul. And the fact of the matter is, people do today read that they should hate their mother, brother, and father, and find satisfaction in that, if it is there. If there's anything that you want to do that's probably against your intuition or the information around you, I promise you, you can find it in the Bible for a way to make you feel just okay by doing it.
Would you like to respond at all to any of those points? Okay, we'll keep the conversation going, and we'll probably introduce some of those questions even later on. Thank you.
Addressing this to the ministers, recognizing that Jesus' philosophy is full of love and compassion, would you agree that it's generally summarized in the Sermon on the Mount? And do you accept that one could believe in Jesus' philosophy without believing in God?
Thank you.
So I think I understand the question to be, can you take Jesus' philosophy and not take Jesus, essentially? And my viewpoint is Jesus claimed himself to be the truth. And I say people can enact part of what Jesus said, but to have the fullness of the truth and to really say you have his philosophy, you must take him. And I would have to answer that way. You can have a philosophical part of the truth, but unless you have the whole truth, then we would have to say there is a blending of the truth and something that's not the truth in that situation. And I think as the discussion goes on, we'll be able to get more into that.
So just to ask, literally, if a secular humanist picks up the New Testament and they find inspiration in the words of Jesus, and they find truth in the words of Jesus, and they're realizing this in their life, if they do not accept the person of Jesus, or perhaps, do you mean like maybe his divinity, for example, that would be problematic? That's basically the point you're bringing up, for example?
Yes, I believe, and let me go further. I think if a person is to be honest with the truth, as they seek the truth and they accept it, it will lead to Jesus Christ, the person of Jesus Christ.
For our secular panelist, maybe you might have a take on that issue?
Oh, I have takes on every issue. I don't want to hog the whole thing. Yeah, this is something that we run into. Just the last question. There won't be any questions here today that we haven't run into many times, and probably most of them we've already even discussed with our friends across the table here. There are lots of philosophies in the world. There are lots of religions in the world, and all of those philosophies and religions have good sides and they have bad sides. And every one of the practitioners that practices any one of those religions basically decides what the good things are that they like, and what the bad things are that they don't like so much, and they use that they use the same internal compass that we all have to make that determination. The religious folks would have said that they just add to that well, you have to take the divinity seriously as well, and on that point we'll just have to disagree. So that's all I'll say for now.
Thank you.
I have a two-part question, and I obviously haven't been here for all the debates. I haven't been here for the discussions. So I'll just ask my two-part question right away, both parts, and then I'll sit down and I'll allow the secular side to answer. My question is, I think that most people who don't believe in God believe in evolution. That's like one of their big, strong points, like evolution is the big basis. My question, do you believe in evolution? And along with that is, where does it begin? Like, what's the beginning of evolution?
I'm sorry, Sean. I got to do this first. We get this all the time.
Hold on one second.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay.
Go ahead.
So the beginning of evolution, and right now it seems that scientists are starting to kind of waver on what they believe back and forth on this idea of evolution. And I just wanted to kind of maybe get your opinion and the question as well.
Okay.
I'm not a scientist. I'm going to defer to the gentleman.
And she's using that term loosely. We get this all the time, that evolution is somehow tied with religion. Evolution is not tied with religion in any way whatsoever. Evolution is a fact. It's a known fact. The scientists of the world understand it. It's backed up by dozens of different disciplines, many of which are brand new in the last 50 years or so. It makes predictions that we can see. It explains things that we know. It's one of the most robust facts we've ever known as human beings. If you don't know that, then you just don't know anything about religion, or you don't know anything about evolution. It has nothing to do with religion. There are lots of religious people who accept the facts of evolution. It's not a belief. It's a matter of whether you accept facts or not. We accept facts.
There's a couple of things I want to point out there. My atheism is not tied to evolution either. We could find out today, well, we couldn't, it is a fact, as he said, but let's just say, let's find out today, factually, that evolution is not the case, that biological evolution is not the process that we see in life today. My atheism doesn't change in the slightest bit. Now, from what I understand from the theology of the Church of God is something that I respect as far as if you believe that the Bible is true and that the Bible is the Word of God, you do have to take chapter 1 literally. You do have to believe that there was a garden and there was a fall in that garden. If you don't, the New Testament doesn't make any sense. Jesus has no purpose on earth if there's no fall in the garden. That's the entire purpose of Jesus. Now, if you don't take it literally that there was a fall in the garden, you kind of have to throw away Jesus and the whole New Testament and then, I don't know, maybe go back to being a Jew or something. But if you believe that the Old and New Testament are in fact the true Word of God, you have to take that literally. And if you take that literally, you also have to take everything that comes after it literally, which is every generation past Adam. And if you add those up, you end up with something around a 6,000-year-old earth, universe, life, and everything. So I respect that. I respect that if you believe that the Bible is the true word of a supernatural deity named Yahweh, then you should believe that the earth and the universe and life, everything on it, is roughly 6,000 years old. So this is where evolution comes into a hot problem with religion, mainly Islam and Christianity, in that their book says something that is entirely different than the facts that we find. Unfortunately, they are facts that we find. Now, if those facts turn out to be something different, it doesn't change my atheism at all. But I do understand why it is such a problem for those that believe the Bible is true, because it does say something that the Bible does not.
You've mentioned this a couple of times in this notion of not having your atheism tied to evolution, and I know you've pondered this quite a bit, but if you can just sort of concisely explain what would help you pivot, what would help you move intellectually, or even spiritually, if I can use that term, toward more of their worldview, or is there anything?
If they no longer needed to put lightning rods on churches, I might start to believe. Yeah, the facts are what they are. We know a lot more than we did 3,000 years ago. So if you're basing your worldview on the scientific knowledge, essentially, that people 3,000 years ago in Mesopotamia had, the world is leaving you behind, and it's a shame. I think there was a second part to your question, and I don't remember what it was. What would make you believe? Well, aside from lightning rods taken off the churches, which, by the way, seem to work. I think that it's important, and Sean and I always try to do this whenever we have an event, is that we try to point out some of the terminology, because people do get the terminology wrong. Being an atheist is a very narrow claim. If somebody asks you if you're an atheist, you have to say, well, which God do you mean? The one thing that we have most in common religiously with religious people is atheism. There are over 20,000 gods that we know have been postulated in history. Many thousand of them are still worshipped today. So I don't know anybody that believes in all of them. I know in people that believe in several of them, and I know in people that believe in some of the more ancient ones. But I don't know anybody that believes in all 20,000 gods. So on the topic of atheism, we are all 99.9992% in agreement. I worked that out mathematically, by the way. 20,000. That's the number you start with to get to 99.999. It doesn't really actually say much when you say I'm an atheist. It's a much better term to say I'm a non-theist, because that knocks them all out. That says I don't believe in Buddha, I don't believe in any of the Hindu gods, I don't believe in the Christian God, I don't believe in any of them. That's a much clearer term. Also, it's very important to realize that when you ask somebody if they're an atheist, it is not a philosophy. It is not a worldview. It is simply saying, I don't believe. It's really unfortunate that we even need the term. We don't have a term for not believing in the tooth fairy. I happen to be an tooth fairyist also. But it's unfortunate that we would need a term like that. It's not a philosophy. There's nothing that we believe simply because we don't believe something. So
maybe something more to the affirmative, like the rationalists or the humanists instead of the
Well,
theists.
if you ask what my philosophy is, I would tell you I'm a humanist. And that, you're absolutely correct, is a philosophy. I am also an anti-theist, which means that I think that any of the religions that I've looked at are demonstrably false, and I'm willing to make the argument. And that's a positive assertion. It is not a positive assertion to say that I'm an atheist. If I say I don't believe in your God, it's not up to me to disprove it. It's up to you to prove it to me. Just the same way as if I say the Earth's atmosphere is made of mostly hydrogen and oxygen. You don't have to believe that. It's not up to you to disprove it. It's up to me to prove it. I made the claim. So just to keep the terms straight.
3 things would do it for me. If I actually saw creation ex nihilo, from nothing, from nada. If God is the same yesterday, today, and forever, this should not be impossible. Nothing is impossible for God. Quoting scripture, I teach Bible and classical mythology, sometimes back to back, and I really see no difference between any of the literary texts from people of faith or no faith. So that would do it for me. Creation ex nihilo, from nothing. Healing, if I saw healing. I'm sure Amy Semple McPherson and the Azusa Street Revival, those holy days, with as many people as requested healing, a few might have been healed, but your faith makes you well. Your faith heals you. And if 3 of the closest people to me, one of my best friends, who was an incredible minister and seeker of God, actually a theist, was healed of her cancer, along with 2 others, I would believe. These 3 people who died in my life, 3 ministers who attended every prayer meeting they could throughout this city and online were not healed. So if I saw those healings, I would believe. And if more prophecies were mind-blowing and correct and enlightening instead of just people's, best guesses. And specifically in my life, I'm not speaking as a professor today, but experientially, if my grandmother's and father's prophecies were correct in their own lives, I might believe. Closest people to me, right? Watching them for decades. So, but I believe in other things. It doesn't mean I don't believe in anything. Anyway, that's another topic, another question.
Okay, thank you very much for that, the full answers that you guys have provided. And I see that we do have a number of people in line, and we'll try to be able to entertain all those questions. Let me allow, however, the Church of God members to respond to anything or everything that they heard. The question really began with a tension between religion and science. And I'm sure you have views on that. You can take it any which way you want, whether or not you necessarily believe in the literal creation narrative, the young earth theory. You can deal with the issue of evolution and perhaps even why God started it in the first place. Or you can even, of course, take it on the issue of the power of prayer and healing. But I guess the larger question is, do you see the tension that they're creating between the discussion of modern science and religion? And you can sort of frame it any way you'd like to.
I think answer simply is that, first of all, I can say on this side of the room, we are not scientists, and we can't pretend to be scientists, and so we're not going to be able to really speak to science. It's not our expertise. And I think we could even safely say that that side of the panel, they're not really scientists either, so we're all quite limited on that particular line of understanding this afternoon. As far as the creation is concerned, we are most definitely believers in the scripture narrative concerning the origins of man.
I think to add further, I want to address a few things. One, I find it very interesting when I interview atheists how people who are not scientists tell me they base their faith on science. And when I interviewed a scientist, he says he based his faith on morals. And I find that amazing that a person who says, I really don't know anything about what I'm talking about, but my faith is in that. To me, that's an incredible leap, intellectually, let alone spiritually. And as to the creation from nothing, I think on this side we say it can be seen in the creation of a new heart, which is delivered from sin. And each one of us, if we had the time, could tell our story as to what we were, and when we found Jesus Christ, the truth, what it did to us. And I think it would be, 2 hours wouldn't be sufficient, and I don't want to, I want to be brief in my answers in respect to the audience, so we'll leave it there and hopefully get to it later, your questions.
Okay, and why don't you go first? Thank you. Thank you. Hello?
Hi. I'm an atheist, been an atheist for over 20 years. My only brother, is Christian apologetics. He does that for a living, basically. We've had lots of debates over 20 years. And I had a question I wanted to ask you because he's not been able to answer that. The question is, aside from quoting the Bible, which for me is just an old book, it doesn't have much more meaning than that. It's written by man. And aside from personal experience, which doesn't have a lot of meaning for me because crazy people think they see things and things are real all the time that aren't real, how do you know, what evidence has assured you to feel you know that God is anything more than just a piece of your brain, something in your imagination? But wait, I was going to ask that question, and then I realized I already know the answer from all these years, and the answer will go back to those two places somehow. It just always goes that way. actually have a different question for the humanists, because I don't consider myself a humanist, and I've struggled with this because the title of it implies that humans, in my mind, I know that humanist means, humans can decide for themselves what's right and wrong, and we have morals and that within ourselves, and that's all great and all, but just the title of it, I wonder sometimes, because I see people who say they're humanists and they'll eat meat like as if it's nothing, and they don't think about the animals that maybe were tortured or killed, murdered to get the meat. And I'm just wondering, I would agree with it if I could call myself a humanist or something. But the question is, how do you just go about your life calling yourself a humanist? Does that for you really mean you are above other animals? Or do you recognize you are an animal too and they should be treated with respect as well? That concerns me.
Okay, thank you for that question. And just going forward, just if you don't mind, just try to make a really concise question for us. And Sean, if you don't mind, let me, however, let the Church of God members respond, just to give them that space, if they'd like to the initial statement. And I think it dealt with, basically, how does one know concretely that God is a metaphysical fact? So basically, how do we know God is?
I'll address the answer this way. First of all, I'm not sure with human understanding, with the way that our minds work at receiving information, that there is another way to understand beyond going to the text, or if we didn't have the text, looking at someone's experience or what somebody has actually done. I don't know what other kind of evidence that there would be that we could even bring up. So to me, to default to that is not, in fact, a default, but it's where we have to go. And I would say the best proof of God's existence is the changed life. So when we, as the brother talked about, when we see someone who was at one moment doing this certain thing that was prohibited, that was wrong, that was against morality, that was against nature, whatever, we'll sum it up and call it sin, when they, at an instant, stopped sinning, so that from that instant forward, we don't see them doing any of those sins for the remainder of their life, that is miraculous. No person, no other theology for that matter, can do or even teaches that that is a possibility. And that's the unique difference with Christianity, true Christianity, and every other point of view in the whole world.
I've seen that happen in education. No.
I'm sorry?
I've seen souls transform, minds open in education, and actually many people freed from fundamentalist indoctrination.
That I would agree with. We would agree that people do change, that people enlighten, people grow, people change perspectives, they even change the way that they're living. But the difference is that what I'm talking about, what we're saying is the power not to commit sin anymore. Not once, not twice, not here and there, not sometimes, but I'm saying no more sin. Name your sin. I'm talking about no more sin, and that would be not only in act, but that would also be in word, that would also be in thought. And
So
that you cannot see in education.
So the end result would be you'd go to heaven instead of hell. And from my perspective, this world is challenged enough in itself to practice the fruits of the Spirit, right? Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. All my Baptist upbringing comes into play here. And that would be a challenge, sufficient for any human life. I couldn't master that. And Jesus' call is be perfect, be perfect.
Which we would agree with there. That is not only the commands of the Scripture, that's what Jesus is telling us to do, but not only that, but that we can do them, so that the fruits of the Spirit are not just challenges for us to attain to, but they're actually the privilege of the Christian to be able to live in this life, so that we have heaven on earth.
I've seen people do that without God. I'm doing it now without God.
Okay, that's good. I'd like to address that. You're saying you live up to, you don't sin at all now without God. I've never heard that, so I just want to understand. I'm not trying to put that.
I didn't say I'm perfect. No, I'm saying as you're striving to live a good life, I'm striving to live a good life as well.
Right.
It doesn't mean I'm on a path to hell and that's my destination.
Sure. That's actually not what Brother Ernest said. What Brother Ernest said is that we weren't striving. We're not actually striving. We have arrived at the place of being sinless. And you said you do that now without God. And that's what I understood. And so did I understand correctly or did I misunderstand you? Because he wasn't saying that we're striving. That's actually, really, you mentioned your Baptist background. That would be a Baptist doctrine, which is actually not much different than atheist doctrine. To us, it's the same.
I haven't arrived at a perfect,
to
full
us, a Baptist is an atheist.
understanding. I believe I'm striving and learning and learning.
Right.
I have not arrived there. But if you all are ordained ministers and saints on top of it, is that what you're saying?
Yes, ma'am.
Oh, wow. Wow.
We didn't brief her appropriately who we were dealing with here.
Okay.
Real quick, just to clear up the humanist question, the manifesto that I've read and agree with myself, obviously with humanism, it's a fairly variable philosophy. There's no pope, there's no holy text. We don't have a Bible. There's a number of manifestos out there. The manifesto that I've personally read and agree with says that we strive to reduce suffering of conscious creatures and maximize the well-being of conscious creatures. So it's not necessarily just humans, and it does not say that humans are above in any particular way. That's that. Real quick, though, just we need to move on, but I just wanted to ask one quick question as that went back and forth. So to clear up, I just want to make this clear. Once you have found God and taken Jesus into your heart and accepted it and believe it, and in the theology that you guys hold to, and to stay to the morals that you stand for, and to understand sin as you do, then you will therefore no longer sin.
That's correct.
Yes, sir, that's correct.
Okay.
That's
Has
correct.
anyone ever been excommunicated from your church for doing wrong?
From our church.
From your congregation, from your national, from the Church of God? Mm-hmm. Not in the theological, biblical sense of the Church of God. I mean your Church of God.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay.
Let me clarify that point.
May we clarify that?
I guess.
All right. Thank you. Go ahead. Good.
To say that someone left and tried to make that association that they were still a saint and held to our beliefs is erroneous as you could get. Obviously, they left because they weren't of us.
I apologize. That's not what I said. I asked if anyone was excommunicated from your church, as they were maybe asked to leave because they did wrong. They did something wrong.
No.
Right. Let me explain
Okay.
our church to you. Okay, as you say, our church. We actually don't believe that we have a church.
I understand.
Okay, we really don't. And that's why we gave the introduction that we gave, which is quite simple. We don't believe we have a church. We believe God has a church, and we believe entry into that church comes when an individual comes to a crisis experience inside of themselves. God deals with them, and actually, to me, this is where the basis of the discussion is. Do you do wrong, or do you not do wrong? Do you have power to live up to your moral code, or do you not? Do you commit sin, or do you not? And to us, that's the code, or that's what we should be talking about.
So as soon as they no longer live by that code, they were never?
Well, what we're saying is this, if you allow me to finish, what we're saying is this. Anyone that enters into that experience is a member of the Church of God by virtue of the experience itself. So has anyone been in the Church of God that we've asked to leave? We don't have a church to ask anyone to leave from.
Okay. I think my question was answered.
Okay.
I think it was too.
For the sake of time, and we have a number of people waiting, I'd like to get as many questions on the table as possible in the time allotted. So please, again, be brief with your question, and I will also ask the panelists to be a little bit more concise with their responses as well, just to balance things out. Thank you.
Is this on? Okay, now it's on. If the Greek version is correct and the English version is not correct, does your church give corrected copies of the Bible to its congregation? And if not, isn't the intentional, perpetual, incorrect information dissemination deceptive?
Thank you very much for the concise question.
Very Very good question. As far as I understood it, you're asking why the original language is not more concisely given. That'd be because we actually speak English and not Greek. So it's just simply a translation. It's not a matter of deception or a matter of giving a correct copy. It's just simply a translation of what the original language was.
But if you're perpetuating an incorrect copy, that is your action. So isn't that deceptive?
If we're perpetuating an incorrect copy, we wouldn't say that the copy is correct. There are many things in other languages that don't directly translate over.
But hate is different than less than love.
That would be so,
Right.
maybe
Right.
from a superficial reading point of view. However, not only do we have, for example, the English text, but because the church includes other languages, we have people here who read the Spanish text. We have people here that read German text. But in addition to that, we also have commentaries and we have concordances that help us when we get to difficult passages to find out why something was translated a certain way, that we can reference the language that we don't know, which might be Greek or Hebrew. So we're not perpetuating the things that are wrong or even the things that are difficult without careful study, consideration, and comparison to be able to go back to the old text and say, okay, hate actually could have better been translated this way without losing the verity of the text.
I know Greek, and Jesus doesn't mince words, and he meant hate.
Okay. We heard the response, I think a little bit from both sides there, and please ask the next person to ask their question.
I'd like to direct my question to the secular side. This is a real personal question to me. How would you comfort or give hope to someone who's lost a loved one here in this life?
Thank you for the concise question.
In a number of different ways. I've done this myself and with fellow non-believers, and I've done so with believers. I do so in the same way as you do. I say what I need to say to make them feel good in their time of despair and sorrow and grief and need. I am not immune to feelings. I am not immune to understanding. I am not immune to seemingly external forces. I do what I need to do, and I tell them comforting things.
I guess I'd like to underline the word not just comfort, but hope.
Yeah, I do that as well. The same answer.
Okay, thank you very much for the question. Next.
Is this on? Oh, there we go. I have a question that is not actually related to a Bible citing. My understanding is the ultimate goal of Christianity is to somehow transcend life and to enter into an eternal afterlife, commonly referred to as heaven. And my question has to do with if you got to heaven and a loved one, a child or a spouse, maybe your spouse is, secretly questioning and maybe doesn't make it into heaven. Now, would that result in an eternity of sorrow and sadness because you are missing your loved one? Or upon entering heaven, would you somehow forget all of your earthly experiences, memories, triumphs, sadnesses, joys, and somehow really no longer be the being you were on earth? That's my question.
And I think you guys wanted to address the last one too, so two are on your table.
I'll take the first one. I think you'll notice in the response to the question last time was very ambiguous. It said, I give hope, I give comforting feelings, but you didn't hear what those were. And I find being in the situation as an ordained minister where I've had to make the phone call to the father who lost his child, who called me, said they're going to pull the plug in a short period of time on my little girl, and she's going to pass away. I've made this call myself. What do you say? And I find that it is extremely helpful and comforting to the parent when I tell them, your child, as the Church of God believes all children go to heaven, your child will be in heaven. And when you meet her, you'll have meaning and she'll understand the part you played in your life. I found Robert Ingersoll tried to comfort people, and his comforting words were, "Know this, that in death there is perfect rest." That's a sorry comfort. Not only that, what do you give hope to the dishwasher who crosses the border because they can't get over illegally, and they live their life as a dishwasher in sorrow and pain, and we say all we have to offer them is the human experience? I say that's cheap and that's shallow when you can offer them heaven and God and the love of God, as we heard about from our young sister preacher this morning.
And the second question that was asked, would you like to respond about heaven, the next life? Anyone?
I don't recall what the...
Joyous if your loved one doesn't make it, or if when you get into heaven, you somehow lose memory of everything that occurred on earth. You know, which is it? What happens? And just as an added, how do you know what happens?
Right. I think it's a very good question. I'm going to answer the question this way. There are many things as humans, the gentleman that asked the question as well as we, there are many things as humans that we actually cannot explain. And there's no one in here that I'm aware of that's void of that liability as far as being a human. And so what we would understand is that would be one of the great faults of being a secular humanist, because the reliance upon humanity is a great fault, because humanity is extremely limited in all of its aspects, including understanding. Even if there is an understanding of science, even if there is an understanding of what's perceived as facts, it's extremely limited. It's given from a human perspective, and I believe, admittedly, that would be limited, quite limited.
But are saints limited?
I'm sorry?
Are saints limited?
Oh, yes, ma'am, in knowledge. Absolutely, we're humans. Absolutely. I think you're looking for an answer that you couldn't give, nor any human could give, and I believe that is my answer. I can give you what the Scripture says, which would do very little because you don't believe the Scripture.
Okay, I think afterwards we can talk a little bit more about the theology of heaven.
I'm happy to do that. And the only point that I was making is simply this, is that from a human understanding, you can ask questions all day long that neither you nor I could answer. And that is the great fault of being a humanist.
Okay. Okay, and you can bring in some of these other points as we go forward, but I am the moderator, and then I do have to keep the pace going.
I have some hope over here to offer, though, Roy. Okay, we'll move on.
Okay, okay, go ahead, please. Please.
One of the stories from the Bible that troubles me the most is the story of Abraham and Isaac. And God asked Abraham to sacrifice Isaac, I guess to prove his love for God. And I've always thought that in some way, God was the sinner. And you could say, well, God didn't actually let him go through with it, so in that sense, he's absolved. But the story does say that, I'm coming to it. The story does say that obedience is the highest of all virtues. Now, I actually believe that obedience is a virtue, but it's a military virtue, and it's a low virtue. Higher virtues are such things as love. The problem with obedience in that sense is that if God demands obedience, then there is a problem with free will. Because if you obey, then you do not have free will. If you do not have free will, then there's a problem with morality. And that's necessary for the whole code to exist. Could you explain how the demand of God for obedience absolve him of the fact that he also wants man to have free will?
Okay, I think it's for your side. And again, if you can just try to make the question as concise as possible.
Unfortunately, I'm not sure with the presentation if I can zero in on the question. I'm going to try to restate what I think the question is. Please let us know if that's the direction you were going. Are you asking, did Well, I'm not even sure how to do it. Maybe you can just simply say what your question is.
The question is...
Say that again, then. If there's a hierarchy in virtue, then God, through that parable, has said that obedience is the highest of virtue, obedience to God. But if that's the highest of virtue, then where does free will exist? It must exist lower, okay? If it exists lower in the hierarchy of virtue, then does...
Okay, stop for just a second. Sorry. So you're asking, and maybe we should start off with, does virtue have hierarchy? And if so, is obedience the highest or not?
Yeah, that seems to be what
Is that the question?
Yes.
Well, I think you do. I think you do agree that in order to obey, you have to have free will. Are you saying that goes together? Did you understand him as saying that?
But if you could sort of respond just based upon sort of how your worldview would take the idea of obedience and free will.
I'll say this. The highest virtue that God has ever commanded is love. And all that goes with love.
A lot of I read here the saying a lot, good without God. Are you good without God? And we are. And so I'm curious if the secularists could define what they mean by good, and how good, or always good, or what is good based on.
Okay, thank you very much.
That's about a 2 or 3 hour discourse, because you're asking what ethics are and what morality is. And
we agree on that.
And I think everybody on this panel would agree with that. We do agree on some points. Ethics and morality is a complicated thing, and it's a very human thing. And it's something that evolves over time and always has. It used to be perfectly accepted in the Bible, and in most places in the world, slavery used to be perfectly acceptable, for example. Positively recommended in the Bible. And these ideas evolve over time as we learn more about ourselves and we learn more about our fellow creatures, and we learn how to treat each other, and we learn how to deal fairly with each other. And so it's a very long and complicated question that I love to talk about. I'm not an expert on, but love to talk about. I think we are all equally experts when it comes to ethics and morality, because we all have a sense of what's right and what's wrong. But without doing the whole 2 hours, I'll stop there.
Real quickly, if I can just add, I mean, it is a matter of fact, and I think we can, again, agree on all sides that there are believers and there are non-believers that are good people and bad people and everything in between. There are believers and there are non-believers that are very well off, very poor, and everything in between. So as far as being good without God, just simply means that, for instance, for myself, speaking personally, I have not been convinced by any particular God claim. As you mentioned, there's 20,000 plus of them. None of them have I been convinced that they are true or real or that they exist, and I'm okay with that. I'm good without that. I'm fine with that. I don't need that. It doesn't change me.
And my footnote is, I would consider myself the same as your ordained ministers, a limited saint.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Next
so
question.
We offer the same result.
If God is the beginning of everything, then where did God come from?
I think that's for this side.
I got it.
I think the question is reflective of a viewpoint where we find that actually, in my opinion, this morning everyone is worshiping a God, whether they make that themselves, Amen. Science, nature, or
that's right.
God. I would agree with them. They're not atheist. I actually consider them pantheist, but that would be another discussion for another time.
when you look at the Big Bang Theory, religious people say, well, something cannot come from nothing. Okay, God is something. Where does God come from?
And I'll try to shorten it. So I think on the humanist side, a lot of times they want to measure God by their God, which is science, which they say they have a very limited understanding of. God is outside of space and time. It's not you don't measure him by space and time. In our world viewpoint, he created that. He always was. It's not something that could be scientifically or empirically measured.
He answered the question. He answered the question.
Yes, sir.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Next.
Before he does that, I'm sorry to interrupt here. Can I have a rebuttal here, Roy?
Go ahead.
We hear this story a lot, that God exists outside of time and space, and we also hear this story that we worship science, which is nonsense. You guys all have cell phones. You all use the internet. You all fly on airplanes. If you want to stop doing all that, you can talk to us about worshiping science. We don't worship science. We are fans of science. We are admirers of science. We understand what science gives us. We understand why we now have a lifespan of 80 years instead of 30, which was the lifespan. The average global lifespan until the beginning of the 20th century was about 28 years. It changed in 1 century because of medical science, based on the biology that we understand that comes from that evolution underpins.
I like drinking clean water.
Yeah, if you want to stop drinking water and living in houses with electricity, then you can talk about worshiping science. We don't worship science, we accept science, and we understand science. We're not scientists, but we understand enough about it to understand how it works. We understand enough about it to take advantage of it. And I think that you guys take every bit of as much advantage of science as we do.
Okay. Question, please.
When I came in, I picked up a tract to familiarize myself with your particular religious group that I was unfamiliar with. And it speaks of the fact that you consider yourself a restoration movement to restore the church to something that it has apostatized from. Requires going back to the original text. I think that you would agree. I'm about the 6th generation in a family that also comes from another restoration group that resulted in the Disciples of Christ, the Christian Church, and the Churches of Christ. So I'm familiar with the concept of restoration. Well, I preached for 32 years, and I'm now an atheist. But I found in my studies that in the Bible, I was constantly coming up with contradictions in doctrine. What was written in one passage did not necessarily square with what was written in another. I came up with contradictions with science. I came up with contradictions with geography, with archaeology, with history.
Is there the question now? The question exactly is to our group?
Are you aware of the fact that other groups have attempted to restore the church? And the second part of that is, if so, why is it that Marcion and Huss and Luther and Zwingli and Wesley and so many other groups, the Pentecostals, in an attempt in their times to restore the church, came up with such vastly different restorations, characteristics of the church that are so different? What I believe and what I'd like you to answer is, why was God so clumsy in revealing his will that we come up with 1,000 different interpretations for it?
Okay, thank you very much. And
very good
you
question.
Have the floor?
I don't believe, obviously, we wouldn't call God clumsy. We would say he's dealing with clumsy people. And he's dealing with people that are limited, and so that's why it may appear that he took a long time. He has limited things to deal with and to get things to our understanding, and that'll be my short answer.
Short answer. Okay. Then, I'm sorry.
Contradictions is clumsiness.
I think they responded to that. Appreciate that. Next question, whoever's next.
We assume that you believe that humanism is a way for people to find happiness. And what I wonder about is whether happiness that is augmented or comes from some type of chemical dependency, whether that is true happiness.
Real quick, I think I need to clarify something. Humanism, that word is a minor part in my brain and life. It's, again, there's no holy text. There's no Bible to humanism. There's no pope or leader to humanism. We don't have a weekly service or anything like that.
Your way of life, I guess, is what I'm saying. Whatever your way of life would be defined as, that you think that's going to bring happiness, or if that's something to offer to people to bring happiness, then...
No. I think if you look at the temporary moment of an effect of some particular chemicals, you may find some happiness, but a terminal use of that would be a bad idea for a number of reasons, depending on the chemical we're talking about.
But we can talk about alcohol or caffeine.
Yeah, none of those work out if you just continue to do them. Yeah, that's not eternal happiness. No, I recommend you don't do that. I'm a fan of alcohol, just not constantly.
Okay, thank you very much.
That's slavery.
The next question, please.
Yes, my question is, why doesn't the Church of God ask scientists to correct some of the things that we've heard from the secular side? First of all, the atmosphere of the Earth is not hydrogen and oxygen, but nitrogen. And oxygen. So we need to be sure we got that one right. The other thing is that
I won't just take your word for that.
Okay,
please look it up.
Okay.
You're right. I'm sorry. That was
the other is
the question.
The latest physics is that the universe, which includes the Earth and everything, did come from nothing.
Okay, just please summarize your question for the panel, please.
Yes.
The question is.
My question was, why doesn't the Church of God look into the science that would be very helpful to you?
Okay, and how do you respond to that?
I think if you had heard the earlier podcast, you would find out we do look into science. And we do, and I think this is great to respond to some of the things that Jim had mentioned. We do appreciate science, but we understand, as Bro Hargrave said, we are clumsy, we are limited, we are finite, and we find that science doesn't necessarily provide all the answers, or it can't be the final solution. I believe one person tried that to find a final solution in science, and it didn't work so well. And we find that God has been the answer to our life, and especially when you consider, and maybe it'll come up later, when you look at the new atheist movement as a whole, you find they are mainly white college professors who live in a sort of bubble, a laboratory bubble, and we could provide several quotes, and maybe we'll get a chance from the founders. And I think...
Okay, 1 second. He's trying to just address
I'll try to summarize.
No, you're preaching to the wrong guy. I'm not a new atheist. I'm an old atheist.
And I don't live in a bubble. I didn't come from a bubble.
And I am a new one, but I'm not white.
I think Sean is the most colorful person the atheists have. But I think if you look overall, you'll find atheism is a white person's religion.
Okay. That again, I'm supposed to be neutral here. But I'm going to allow the secular side to respond to, because there were some broad statements being made, and we're talking about issues of diversity and atheism. And let me give you a minute if you'd like to respond to that issue.
Yeah, the diversity within atheism, if you're talking about out atheists in percentage-wise in America, you're going to find the diversity rather similar as to the diversity in America. America is mostly white people. So you get a small group, and I'll be damned, it's mostly white people. It's pretty diverse. I'm here. That helps, I think.
Okay, thank you very much. Who's ever next can go, please. Ask the question, please.
Sorry, my first question was already asked, but since this is a discussion and we're trying to gather information, and something that's really made me curious is more to Professor Culkin, is when and how you became a saint. I would like to know that.
Amen.
According to your definition, is a saint going to heaven and a follower of Jesus and washed in his blood? So we could define it differently, but I'm not, I can just speak for myself. I'm trying to be a good person.
Sure.
And
I believe
struggling
that.
with that.
I believe that.
So we can absolutely agree upon that. I read in your Holiness article that I would probably fall into the category of being civil, and then you said civil people still don't have Jesus and they're going to hell. But if this world is sufficient and I'm following Micah 6:8, according to your book, right? I'm doing justice, I am loving mercy, and I'm walking humbly, right?
With your God.
With your God.
Yes. So,
right?
So who would your God be?
My God
that you're walking
is
humbly with.
enlightenment. If you had to put your finger on something, but I'm trying not to be an idolater or have an object of my worship.
I understand.
As so often, Jesus is turned into. And so often God is turned into.
That's a good answer.
By understanding God, we make an idol of God. You would, if there was a God,
was a good answer.
if we had to construct a God.
Thank you very much for responding to the question. Thank you for the short, concise question.
Yes. As a biologist and someone who teaches zoology and evolution, I invite anybody here, brothers and sisters, if you want to discuss evolution, golden opportunity today. As a biologist, the insinuation that I believe you're referring to Hitler, let's get it out on the table about the final solution, that the brother in the middle, you referred to Hitler, you
Yes,
alluded
sir.
to Hitler, final
Yes,
solution. That comment demonstrates to me an incomplete knowledge of history and a complete disinterest in even looking to see what Hitler said in Mein Kampf. He specifically referred to his faith and duty as a Christian to rid a certain tribe, a certain group of people. I will stop there. My question is, the notion of a sinless life is very intriguing. It's very interesting. Could you please define what you mean by sin?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes. Very good.
You want to take it? Sure, I'll take that one.
We all liked it.
Everybody wants it.
So, simple answer. Sin is any time that you do something that's against God, against his known command, or against fellow human beings.
And to add to that, it would be simply, maybe not even so much adding, it'd be simply doing something that you absolutely know, your internal compass, that you absolutely know is wrong, but you did it anyway.
Did it anyway.
And what we're saying is a Christian, the difference between us and, like I said, Baptists and all those things are lumped together with us. The difference between what we're saying is that the Bible gives an individual power to live a life where they no longer do things that they know are wrong. And my question earlier was, does anybody that's a humanist, atheist, or in the coalition, do they live like that? Are you actually living like that?
The definition of sin is hamartia, and that means missing the mark. So anytime you miss the mark, that's a sin. And we both agree that both sides are limited and flawed, that we're all humans.
Yes,
That would be
it's
in-
actually not a sin to be a human.
Right, it's not a sin to be a human, and that
But
missing
you
the
said you
mark,
struggled.
which
Right.
the missing the mark, we
And
would
we're
agree that that definition is true.
Yes.
But it's not that you had a target, you shot the target with the very best of your ability, and you missed it by accident. We're talking about you knew the target was north, but you turned and you shot south. knowing that you should have shot north.
Yes.
That's missing the mark in the scriptural sense.
And also, more like this very quickly. It's not a matter, I forgot my wallet today. That is missing the mark. But the Bible doesn't define that as sin. I forgot my wallet today. I look at pornography, that is sin. And there are individuals that live that way. That would be the distinguishing characteristic, because humanity is limited, so they could forget their wallet. But looking at pornography or cheating on your wife or being a racist, we would say those things are sin itself, outside of humanity. So someone could be completely delivered from pornography, racism, and all those things, yet forget their wallet because they're a person.
Okay. Thank you for the examples and clarity. Next question, please.
Can I just say, that side specializes in defining sin. That always made me very uncomfortable about that side.
About what? Thank you.
This is for the secular side about free will. Do you believe somebody has free will?
Wow. Another 2-hour discussion. You guys got to come to the after party. The two of you that asked those questions must come and join us at the after party.
I think we can do it in 10 minutes.
Happy to talk about these things at length. They are not simple answers. They are very complex answers. I'll also take this opportunity to apologize for the hydrogen. If I misspoke, I of course did mean nitrogen. I believe it's mostly nitrogen, 28% oxygen, and the rest other gases.
Jim, it's all right. You know you're limited.
What's that? What's that?
I said it's all right. We know you're limited.
I love you anyway.
Okay, we have the new right percentage, but we're good. Go ahead, Jim. You're fine, Jim.
We're
Please.
footnoted.
So
Asterisk.
we know that this is a large question. I don't know if you want to attempt it in such a brief response, or do you want to pass on that one?
Can we request that it be answered?
Well, again, it's a very complex question about free will. It's like asking about ethics. It's a very complicated question. It's not simple. And it's very important that you get definitions right when you're talking about free will, because people have arguments all the time about what they're at. You know, I've seen people argue past each other a lot on these kind of issues because they're just not understanding what each other's terms mean. I would say yes, of course we have free will. I think the folks on the other side of the panel would say yes, we have free will. That's what gives you the ability to decide whether you want to do the right thing or whether you're not going to do the right thing. If we didn't have free will at some basic level, there'd be no point in having the discussion.
Amen.
Okay, next question, please.
So I will try to keep this relatively brief, but I need to set up some context. Initially, I have to just say these men, human beings up there, sitting here saying that they are free of sin, however your own definition is one of the greatest examples of pride and egotism I have ever heard, and that's why a lot of people laughed. I will give you a brief context. I was also a born-again Christian, as many here were, and have become an atheist given some exploration and asking questions. Some atheists that I know are some of the most generous, loving, caring, intelligent, and good people I've ever known, and they are this way without the imagined promises of heaven or the threat of hell. So let me get to the point. We have a greater understanding of the way things work. Time goes by, we discover more, we learn more. Every millennium, every generation, every decade, we see evidence of this. And specifically, I should say, I'm pointing this question specifically to the children in the audience, the mothers who are influencing the next generation of humanity. This is important stuff. So as human beings, we no longer pray and dance to make it rain or think that thunder and earthquakes are the gods throwing a temper tantrum. So we now know better than to believe the fairy tales early human beings, goat herders, and superstitious tribal people made up from the time that we as humans were basically toddlers. So for all the other religions, for all the other religious beliefs that you don't believe in, the ones that you think are wrong, misguided, or evil by your definition, is it wrong for those churches and people who rely on faith and belief in those religions to be teaching their innocent children from their primitive ancient religious books? Shouldn't kids be free to grow up without brainwashing and let them figure out how to intelligently look at religions when they have the tools and mental maturity to make a smart, informed decision on their own?
Before you go, just one quick question, and then I'm going to let him answer. Are you one of those caring, compassionate, nice, generous people that you mentioned?
I am a human being, so I have great capacity in all aspects.
I'm just asking, are you one of those people that you mentioned among your people?
Am I?
Yes, he is. I'm just asking
I will
him.
let other people define for me. I'm not.
So you don't know if you are or not?
I'm not interested in self-defining myself and putting myself on a pedestal.
I'm not asking you to put yourself on a pedestal.
You guys are doing that fine all in your own.
Are you included in those group of people?
Right.
She said yes. She's your character reference. Yes, you can move on.
Other people can speak for me. I'm not going to elevate myself and say that I'm better than anybody else.
Let me rephrase it, and then I'll leave it alone. Would you be accepted among those people? Would they accept you into their fold?
I think that was made clear.
So you would agree with?
Well, if we could let him. Everyone's answering for this gentleman. Could you please answer your question?
That's
weird. I have no desire.
Let me just say something. Right. I think that he's made the question relatively clear, and let's sort of make sure the panel is doing the talking.
Mm-hmm.
So unless we have some reason to clarify, and so maybe you want to respond to his overarching question, if you don't mind.
And I think I'll try to restate your question in the words of Richard Dawkins, and see if I understand it right. In I'm reading 372 of the God Delusion. Amish children never volunteered to be Amish. They were born into it, and they had no choice. There is something breathtakingly condescending, and as well as inhumane, about the sacrificing of anyone, especially children, on the altar of diversity. A small part of me can see something in this, but the large part is made to feel very queasy indeed. And I think the question you're asking is about our children. Is it okay to train them to be what we teach? And Dawkins had a problem with that. He said we shouldn't have that sort of diversity. We should all be like him. And to that we would disagree. I can read the paragraph. I can follow it up if you want to. He'll say, we have our computers, we have this. I don't feel good about the Amish being the way they are. Hold on.
Let's put it back towards the other religions that you don't believe in. Mm-hmm. Is it morally correct for them to be brainwashing their kids, bringing them up on these ancient books from when people were goat herders and nomadic, and I mean, when people didn't know better? We're in the 21st century. We know better. We do better now. Is that immoral for them to be raising their children, or should kids be allowed to grow up, learn things, and then make their own mind when they have the capacity and tools to be able to do so?
Okay. And your answer is?
I was trying to get there. Hopefully we will let the panel do the talking. I think we violated that the other way around this time.
No, okay, you're fine.
Dawkins says, no, let's make them all the same. And he says, let's not sacrifice them on diversity. Sacrifice diversity. I think if we truly believe there is a God and that they could live free from sin in this world, it would be immoral for us to teach them anything else.
Amen.
Okay, thank
Amen.
you very much. I appreciate that. And the next question?
Okay. I have always understood sin to be as a transgression against God. Apparently there's some different ideas going on around the table, but wouldn't it be fair to say that if there is no God, then none of us are sinners?
Yeah, I think that's fair.
There's no God.
So if you take the hypothesis that there is no God, which you don't start from, but just sort of entertain the idea that there is no God, then the idea of sin, as you're defining it, would be very difficult to maintain.
I would differ with that in this respect, because regardless of what an individual believes, whether they believe the Bible or whatever they believe, they are a person, and they live with themselves. And God has actually trapped us, what we believe. God's trapped us. He created us so he can break in and talk to us whenever he feels like it. We don't believe that there has ever been a person, a human being, that God has never spoken to, or that doesn't understand what we went back to earlier and said, look, I understand this is wrong to do, but I did it anyway. We believe that's an internal compass in every human being. And so that in and of itself would prove that there's something, even if you didn't know it was Jesus, that there's something else dealing with me. I recognize that I'm not living up to a certain code, and I still would like the panel to, I'd like the panel to discuss if they live up to that code, whatever that code is.
Dear God.
They've also been invited to the after party.
Yes. Our internal monologue is nothing supernatural. And through the benefits of fMRI machines and modern neuroscience, of which I am not, we can see a lot of that. We know what an internal monologue is, and there's no external play in that. Regardless, if you just don't know that, that's fine too. But it doesn't mean you know something else. It doesn't mean that you know it is an external force. And this is always my problem with any of the gods that are out there. I'm okay saying that I don't know plenty of things. Sure. I like to find out, and if we do know, I'll probably learn. But it's fine if I don't know. That doesn't mean it's something else, though. Saying that I don't know where that internal monologue comes from does not mean that therefore it's the God of that particular book and he has a particular name.
Sure.
Now, more to your incessant question of do I always live up to what I have in my internal monologue?
Thank you.
On purpose, yes. Mm-hmm. Now, it may be on occasion that I have made a mistake against my will or because of what was going on around, or maybe I learned something later and thought back and realized, you know what, maybe that was not the best decision that I had made. But I never intentionally do harm to others.
Okay.
I would like to just try to sum that up by saying that we believe that all of us at these tables and everybody in the audience has that same internal compass. The difference is we don't think it's Jesus.
No,
and if we are flawed, it's very possible when Sean talks about doing things accidentally that are wrong, he might be very flawed. He might be wrong about some things. He might be misguided about some things. But we think that you guys are equally susceptible to that.
Sure. But actually, we're not, again, and I apologize if it's an incessant question, I'm not actually speaking about flaws. Neither am I saying that our internal compass is Jesus himself. What I'm saying is Jesus himself speaks with us through our internal compass, as you're saying. And I'm hearing you say that you live completely in every way according to what your morals are and never fail. That's what I'm hearing you say.
Jesus never said that to his listeners. In the Sermon on the Mount, he was teaching them, he was instructing them as a rabbi. So that came through instruction. Okay. He didn't say, I will be speaking to you.
Mm-hmm. I don't know that I understand what you were saying.
The answer is no. We don't always live up to what we want to live up to.
Yes, sir. And I realized that was the answer. And the reason for the incessant asking is because I was just simply trying to get you to answer it honestly.
Absolutely. I'm happy to say that I'm human.
Yes,
and I'm happy to say that you are too.
I'm actually not talking about humanity. I'm talking about pornography, sin.
Okay.
I watch pornography.
Free from that.
What is it?
We just don't think it's sin.
I believe you do. I feel it.
I've never hurt anyone by it.
Again,
you haven't hurt your wife by that?
No, she was there.
Okay. And this is very good. This is very good. Listen, now we're getting down to where it really is.
We did not hurt anyone.
Okay, now we're getting down to reality. Okay, let's deal with that. Mr. Moderator, bless your heart. Now it took us an hour and a half to get to a real conversation. But if you and your wife were there watching pornography, you say you weren't hurting anyone. What about the individuals, male or female, that you are watching perform an act that was contrary and immoral?
The ones that consensually got paid to do
that? Yes, those people.
They seemed very happy. I watched the whole thing.
Those people.
They were very happy.
On that point,
those people.
We will now move to the next question.
This all
who has
started
been
with
waiting?
indoctrinating the children, though, and the opposite and we end up with pornography. Where are our minds?
Okay,
But the opposite of indoctrination isn't anarchy. Not anything goes. There's really no fear.
We would
in
not
just living
we would
by
not
it.
disagree with that statement.
Okay.
The difference is
Right.
who gets to do the indoctrinating. So we
Exactly.
could either do it ourselves or someone else will pick up where we leave off, whether it be you, whether it be another group, whether it be the government.
And
somebody will work, because we all know that we can't leave children to themselves. Children must have guidance.
Exactly.
Children must be
Of course.
instructed. And the question is not, is it wrong to indoctrinate them? The question really is, which doctrine are they going to get?
Exactly.
And as the brother said, I think you could agree, if you would be honest, that if we could teach them the best life for you to live, not only for the benefit of yourself, but for the benefit of the society, would be to live this way, then we would be immoral not to give them that information.
Exactly.
Amen.
Exactly.
Yeah,
And so
we
that's
understand
that would be the.
We understand
Right.
that.
Yeah.
And we're actually coming to a place where we understand more about your belief. Your belief is simply, I'm hearing you say, look, if I want to do something that feels good, I'm going to do it. And that's why I don't believe in God. That's why I don't believe in God, because I don't want you to tell me that it's wrong.
That would be ignorant
That would be incredibly
I
ignorant.
feel like it's ignorant.
and simplistic and naive and selfish.
simplistic and naive and selfish.
Sure.
And there are plenty of people who are non-believers who have completely different ideas about things like pornography. So
Sure.
just because you're hearing from one person about that doesn't necessarily mean that that person is speaking on behalf of every atheist that ever was.
Especially
Of
because
course.
remember, I'm the non-white one.
I'm actually looking at you. You are a little white. You have some white.
And I'm the woman, and
Please
one of my
intro-
best friends
your
put
question.
herself through Pepperdine by starring in those films. So
Okay.
who
Thank
am
you.
I to
Next
judge?
question, please.
I believe it.
Trying to be concise, hopefully I won't butcher this question. First, I'd like to direct it at our Bible scholar, and then to the brothers of the Church of God. But a little bit earlier, we touched on the Bible as a historical text and the translations that have happened over time and how they've impacted content. And perhaps the English Bible that people use now may not be the most literal, or may not be the best representation of what was originally intended. One of the things that's always bothered me is that you refer to him as Jesus. That wasn't his name. It was Yeshua in Aramaic. I mean, every other name was changed from Aramaic to Greek, and then for some reason, every other name was anglicized, but Jesus stayed Greek. He wasn't Greek, and we don't speak Greek, so why is his name still Greek? I mean, it's, passive-aggressively, I've called people the wrong name routinely just to mess with them. Is it, disrespectful, or do you think it hurts his feelings ever?
Okay, so that's the question on the table.
It's all Greek to me.
A larger question in there, but Pam, maybe you want
I
to
know
respond.
Messianic Jews use the term Yeshua, or HaMashiach, more appropriately the title. If they prefer Jesus, it's just a matter of names. Names are more essential and primal in Judaism than they are in Christianity. But I also wanted to respond to just the judgmentalism coming from the other side when I mentioned that one of my friends put herself through Pepperdine, through starring in those films. I also had church-going friends too, but you were quick to jump on, oh, I believe it, I believe it, I believe it. You had those friends. That's really condescending. And also when you jumped on my friend Sean for saying, oh, I believe you watch pornography. I believe it. I believe, now we get to it. And you were ready to open the Bible and thump and judge or something. I mean, we're trying to be good people just because we don't have Jesus.
I believe that.
Okay.
And it's not. It's certainly not my intention to unnecessarily offend you. However, the Bible is quite offensive, and
it is. Yeah, but I have a range of friends that I didn't like.
The Bible's quite offensive, and if we're talking, if it's a matter of judgment, I believe that it's equal on both parts. I believe you've already judged us, and that's become clear and apparent.
I don't know you. I don't know you.
Well,
We've been here a short while.
Sure, and I understand. And actually, I believe I like you. I mean, I believe you. What I feel like makes an atheist is religious hurts. I think somewhere along the line, mostly, a lot of times, somewhere along the line, there are religious hurts. You see a hypocrite. You see a lightning rod on the church. You see somebody that says they're a Christian and they go to the nightclub and I live just as good as they do, and so there's nothing anyway. And I believe if that's all there was, I'd be an atheist.
You know what? It was actually one of the promises in the Bible, seek and you shall find, and I found it. I found it.
What actually did you find?
Okay, and so just to make sure though, do you have a response, not just to what Pam said, but to
Yeshua?
Yeshua, there's been this.
I agree with her response.
The,
Her
the,
response
the
was
constant question that's been raised, I've heard it two or three times.
You don't have to go on. Her question.
Her response
her
was
answer
good.
was a good answer.
It's a very good
answer.
Excellent. Okay, so we agree. Thank you.
To go back to the diversity issue, as I observe the audience, I don't see any black people represented among you. And so I guess my question is that does the coalition see all nations or all nationalities and peoples as equal, specifically whites and blacks? And I don't want to limit that to just your personal feelings, but also how does your leaders, your authors and speakers feel about that issue as well?
It's just usually Sean and Jim. I mean, they let a woman on.
We're very slowly getting there.
That's not a good answer. You didn't answer. Answer the question.
I'm actually quite terrible with remembering what details about people, and I have been known to forget whether somebody has long hair or short hair. I've been known to forget whether they were black or white. To me, it doesn't make any difference. Skin color makes no difference, and I don't think it makes any difference to any secular person that I've ever met.
And there are a number of African Americans in our local immediate groups.
And there are, yeah.
So is there not, can you safely say that there is not any racist traits at all in the foundation of the coalition?
I would say that we have a long way to go as a human society to overcome these racist barriers that have been erected over the millennia. But I would say that every single person that I know that is a non-believer works very hard at making that dream come true.
Richard Dawkins, as he mentioned, one of our most famous authors in the new atheist movement, has started a foundation and works quite often with the we are all Africans movement, because as evolution shows, we do all come from Africa. We all come from dark-skinned Africans. That's where we all came from.
Okay, thank you very much. Next question, please.
This panel, something that kind of puzzles me actually. Now, I'm a chemist, and my background is in biochemistry, so that's something I tend to think about a lot. And I hear, everyone talking about how, oh, we're not scientists, maybe the atmosphere is made of hydrogen, maybe it's made of helium, maybe it's made of pixie dust, we don't really know. But we do know the theory of evolution is not true, we don't teach it to our children. So I guess I'm curious to know, why does the Church of God reject the theory of evolution? Because speaking for myself personally, I find the evidence very persuasive. So I was just curious to know what the basis is for that. That. I know I talk pretty fast. So.
I think you do talk fast, but you're very clear, I think.
Okay.
Thank you.
So,
Just for the audience sake, everybody knows Jonathan. He's on the podcast, and they've met him and talked to him before.
as Christians, we hold to what God said, and we don't feel that evolution has been proven as conclusive. I think we appreciate the direction it's going, though. Until not too long ago, if in talking about terms, within the last 100 years, the atheist would tell you that the world was, Jonathan, you could probably correct me if I use the wrong term, solid state. Right, it had always been. And now we have the Big Bang Theory, which they've jumped on. So I appreciate that from an eternal world to a 15 billion-year world is coming more than halfway my way. I say give science a few more years, and they'll be there. The fact of the matter is, it's not proven. And when I think of who started, or didn't start, who really, Darwin promoted it, and I read his thoughts, both morally and ethically, I find that it's pretty hard to say that someone with that sort of views could be rational when it came to other things. The first book I believe he wrote was Origin of Species and the Preservation of Favored Races, and we often hear that just means deeds, but I have some quotes from him where he says something like this: "The break between man and his nearest allies will then be wider, for it will intervene between man and a more civilized state, as we may hope, even than the Caucasian and some ape, as low as the baboon, instead of as now, between the Negro or Australian and the gorilla." Let me see if he says several things like that.
Real quick, evolution is not a moral code. I just want to make that clear.
But evolution was driven by a person.
And it
who
doesn't
had a
matter. It
moral
doesn't matter who
agenda.
found it. It doesn't matter
Who was limited?
I mean, I
like
don't.
Everybody?
Yeah, Isaac Newton spent more time on alchemy than he did on physics. But he was right about some stuff and he was wrong about others. I don't understand your point, Pat.
I think some people make scientific assumptions to back up a belief system they have. Some sciences, let me conclude this. Some people come to scientific conclusions based on science, and some have a reason to believe and to come to a conclusion which they call science.
I think that some people come to religious conclusions based on the very same thing. And most people come to scientific conclusions based on actual evidence.
I would say that's not necessarily true.
And we have more evidence for evolution, though I'm not a scientist. We have more evidence for evolution than we have for gravity.
Okay, our time is coming to a close, but we do have, I think, 4 people here who can ask questions, and maybe we can get them all on the table. So if you can, maybe this will be a little quicker, just tell us what the question is, and then I'll let either side or both sides entertain them. So just please ask your question, and we'll put those out in front, please.
I think it's fantastic that Church of God members have so many women and girls here. My concern has to do with the way the doctrine of the Bible treats women. I believe I'm not a scholar, in Romans and Timothy, I believe, there are some lines that talk about how a woman should not teach, that it's forbidden, and that she should learn everything she needs to know from her husband, and is essentially an appendix, a supportive apparatus, if you will, to help her husband to bear his children and to keep his home clean. Now, my question is really twofold. Why is there no woman on your panel? And 2, how can any girl or woman in this room allow themselves to be subjugated to second-class citizenship? Thank you.
Okay, that's one question. Okay, I'll make sure you guys have time to respond to that issue. Please.
Professor Pam, I'd ask that you don't respond to this because I think this is your first time being on the panel. But I just wanted to get your 2 opinions because you've been meeting with us several times. And I'm sure you've talked to a lot of different religious groups. What is your opinion of us?
Okay, that's a second question. So their opinion specifically of the Church of God. Third, please.
My question is, how do you base judgment? Like, you're saying, like, I heard earlier, we don't judge. But, like, if you were with me and I took you around the west side of Chicago and I said, oh, don't worry about your car, just leave it unlocked.
Right.
Just leave it unlocked. Don't worry about the people around here. Where the neighborhood is, like, horrible, where it's just not wise to do that. You're passing judgment on all these people in this neighborhood. How do you base judgment? Where does that come from?
Okay, thank you. That question is the third, and then please.
Being smart, not stupid.
Okay, please.
In Joshua 1-10, Joshua asked the Lord to make the sun stand still so that he has more time to feed his enemies. Now, this was back in the day when, of course, people believed that the sun revolved around the earth. If God is so smart, why didn't he say, wait a minute, Joshua, you're wrong. I'm not going to make the sun stand still. I'll make the earth stand still because the earth revolves around the sun, not vice versa. My point is, and my question is, does this not prove what the gentleman earlier said, that the Bible was written by a bunch of ignorant goat and sheep herders who knew nothing about science? Any third grader today would have more knowledge of the universe than Moses. Thank you.
What do you really think? I'm joking. We're friends. We're friends.
As a literary critic, when the sun stands still, that just means it was a long day of fighting. They were speaking metaphorically.
Okay, so let me allow our panelists to respond to those questions or topics, and I'll pick the order and maybe rephrase it if you don't mind. And there's obviously a tension, particularly for non-theists, regarding the role or lack of a role of women in leadership. And so if you can explain this dynamic in your tradition, do you allow women priests or ministers? What type of view do you have of women in your movement? And I guess in theory, could they have been part of the panel?
Yes. First answer is there was no particular agenda for why there was not a woman here. This could have been an all-women's panel as far as the Church of God is concerned. Had you come this morning, Sean,
yes,
you would have heard a good message by a sister, very young sister right over here, preached this morning. So that, first of all, is a testimony to our position on women. Secondly, without going into the text that our gentleman asked the question about, it would take some time to bring you to an understanding about what he was writing about. My wife was one of the ones who asked a question, and as you see, she was free to ask that. My wife doesn't ask everything that she needs to know from me, because in many regards, my wife is quite a bit smarter than I am.
Amen.
As a matter of fact, I have.
It is true.
Mine is too.
It is true.
As a matter of fact, I have 1 degree. My wife has 2 degrees. My wife was formerly a physical therapist, so she has a high level of understanding and skill and da-da-da-da-da. So those scripture texts that he's talking about are a misrepresentation, a misappropriation of the text, without delving into that. Secondly, our sisters are not second-class citizens. They're actually first-class citizens because the Bible teaches the men that we should take care of them and promote them and provide for them. But not only that, we would believe, more importantly, that true Christianity, and let me also recognize there are a lot of groups that are conservative, that look like us, that do what you just talked about.
Right.
You're right.
Right.
We recognize that. Let me finish my answer, because you already had your chance, so let me go ahead and give my chance. That there are a lot of religious groups that are very conservative, that treat their women secondhand. Their job is to bear children. Their job is to clean up after the husband. And we are very much against that. We preach against that. We teach against that. And we don't think that a correct understanding of the scriptures even would bear that out, somebody who has just a little bit of time of reading the scriptures. Thirdly, we think that that the Bible actually exalts
Absolutely.
women
Absolutely.
to the highest place
Amen.
in society that they do enjoy in
Amen.
Christianity. That outside of Christianity,
Amen.
Without God, women are treated as second-class citizens. And so,
Amen.
for example, since most fashion is designed by white males that are training the women to only buy the clothes that are most revealing to satisfy the lust and desires of men, I say that's making a woman a second-class citizen.
Amen.
As opposed to letting the woman be fully clothed, and let's get to know the woman on the basis of her character and not
Amen.
the basis of on her appearance. Why in the world do we need makeup? Isn't a woman beautiful as she is? Why do we need somebody to make up and to fix up and to nip and tuck and do all of those things? That is second-class citizenry. That's saying that the woman isn't quite good enough as she is. What she really needs is a little bit of this, a little bit of that, and then she'll be just what I want her to be. So,
this will be good.
okay. I just told you that had you been here this morning, she would have. Oh no,
sir.
Okay, sir.
No.
Sir, that's not correct.
I have a comment
We'll let that
about
go.
women in fashion. It
We'll let
seems
that go.
like there's an enforced uniform here. And don't they have a freedom to choose what they want to
Yes,
wear?
ma'am. That's
I
a
don't
very
see
good question.
freedom. Do you really?
Just add.
Awesome. I love wearing my little white suit today, too.
All right, well, I think that addresses that question.
You're right.
I love it.
Very good.
There was a question also about the issue of judgment, but I think that that's been a subtext of much of what we've talked about and the definitions of sin. So I don't know if you want to jump into that, but I think that's been dealt with quite a bit. The last question that was asked dealt with sort of the issue of prophets or biblical figures who get information wrong. I don't know if you want to respond to that, but, you know, I don't know if you want to respond to the issue of these instances where they may have said something different or not. Okay. Okay, the sun revolving around the earth, for example. Like
The
those
long
kind of
day,
specific,
metaphorically speaking, from the literary critic over here.
yes, from literary critic, maybe you want to sort of respond to how. So maybe.
Also metaphorically, it means everywhere, north, south, east, west.
Okay.
The point is that it's a real long day.
Okay, then let me then, if I can, there was a question, and it was something that I thought about as I came here, and that dealt with sort of the views that each group has about one another. And this was technically not supposed to be a formal debate, but I'm sort of glad we have one. Because there are real differences in these worldviews, and they have important implications for society and for these communities and for how we perceive them. What I am interested in is this, because most of the people on the panel have actually interfaced and had really robust conversations online, and I've seen it. And I don't know if they've been as animated as this one has been. I am curious about this from both sides, if they can answer as honestly as they can, and it deals specifically with the other person's worldview. So it gets to sort of how you view the other. Because I'm sure that there are probably some aspects of the other person's worldview you find attractive, or if you can, what may they be? You know, is there something about the other person's humanist versus religious worldview that seems attractive from your perspective, given all of the assumptions that you bring and all the claims that you make? Is there something about the other person's worldview that you think needs to be foregrounded?
Yeah, thank you.
This is when the 3-hour lecture begins?
Yes, yeah.
Is this right?
I'm going to try to make this real short. There's
Don't
a
worry.
few things I want to mention on that there. First of all, I just, because it was, initially, I like the way you asked it, and I'm going to answer the way you asked it, but initially it was asked for Jim and I what we felt about, because we have had a couple of online discussions with Patrick and Ernest, and a few of the other gentlemen were there. We went to one of their services, and I will say personally from my experience, I actually really love these guys. And despite differences on very important things in our lives as far as what we accept, they're actually really great people. The kids, from everything I've seen, are incredibly well behaved. Everyone was incredibly polite, and they're incredible singers. But we've had a lot of fun, and I actually really enjoy them. And I've got nothing on a personal level, you know, apart from science and worldviews and those sorts of things. One thing I do I really like their jackets. I'm a fan of the jackets. I'm against facial hair, though. I don't appreciate that they let it grow.
You may have a convert over here very easily, too.
Hopefully there's video and not just audio of this. No, they're really great people. We've had a great time. As far as this church versus other churches, I think that was another part of the question, because we have spoken to a lot of other churches and a lot of people with different theologies. I myself have a very diverse religious background. I went through a lot of seminary school with Mormons. I've worked through a Christian organization, I've been to, I can't tell you how many different Christian churches, and went to their services. And I've been to Muslim Salah, I've been to Catholic Mass, I've been to a lot of it. Despite differences in reality and worldviews, I think the Church of God and Mormons actually are some of my favorite people. apart from politics and worldviews and our perception of reality. But from what I've seen personally, very good people. I've really enjoyed them a great deal. I'm sorry, I think there was another part to that, but.
I would also say, I would echo that. Obviously, Sean and I know each other. So we've had the similar experience with the Church of God. They are certainly some of the most sincere people that we've ever met, and we would never doubt their sincerity, the sincerity of their beliefs. We certainly, obviously, don't agree with the beliefs, but they're very sincere and they're very generous and very honest people. And I appreciate that very much about them. That's not to say that's exclusive of them, but we very much enjoy spending time with them and talking to them. They're, as Sean said, they're very good people.
One thing before, Pam, I'm sorry. Just to get back to, because I know there's some question on this, they were actually looking to have a female on the panel. They do have female ministers, and from everything I've seen, they're quite open to be able to speak on their own behalf. They do treat women as equals from everything I've seen in the Church of God. And now I'm going to pass it to Pam for how biblically accurate or inaccurate that may actually be.
Yeah, how much to say? Just succinctly, I think all people trying to fight the good fight and live a good life should really be commended. So we're on the same side there, really, not antagonists. My hope is always, in any forum, that there's just an open, honest, critical, and creative, relentless search for the truth, instead of coming to something with prejudice or prejudged. And so I didn't judge them in advance, but I think I felt more judgment coming from their side. So that's one difference. But to be applauded for having wonderful families and ethical living.
Thank you very much. And I'll let this side have the last word. Is there aspects about the secular worldview? We understand, I think, pretty clearly the religious worldview. You've articulated very well. Yet, if you can sort of think from their paradigm, is there any constructive aspects about it that you see that's unique to their worldview?
I don't know that. Let me back up. First of all, thank you, Sean and Jim, for again getting this all set up. These are. I enjoy this. I enjoy the opportunity to do this again, and I'm thankful for the bonds that have begun to be developed over the last few months as we've gotten to know each other, and that is good. You all are frequently.
Amen.
I've almost got them converted. You all have frequently been in on my lips in prayer, and I don't just mean generally, but I mean specifically, and that's because that I'm growing to care for you deeply as I get to know you more and more. I don't know that I can say that I see something particularly unique in their worldview. Certainly nothing that's attractive to me, but I will say what I do like, what I do appreciate, maybe not like, what I do appreciate is that, and I'm only going to speak about these two because these are the two that I know best, and maybe some of the others that we've been together, but I can't speak for everybody. What I do appreciate is that when they found religious disappointment, they didn't stop looking for the truth because of the longing in their heart that had to have answers. They kept looking for it. And because I believe that Jesus is the truth, capital T, any point of truth that they accept, it's going to bring them to Jesus Christ as long as they take it in the fullness of the truth. As long as they continue to walk in it, I think it won't be long.
That sounded circular to me.
I think it won't be long.
Wait, the truth leads you to truth?
And Sean can finally, I think it won't get long, and Sean can finally get his jacket.
We'll fit him after the meeting house is over. I don't know if you would like to share any final thoughts before we close.
I would like to thank, personally myself, Sean and Jim, and also Pam for doing this and for the hospitality shown. Sean has invited us personally to his home for the last recording and was very hospitable, very kind, very nice. I too was hoping that, I told the brethren, if Sean gets converted by coming to the morning service, I would like to have a part in baptizing him. I said I'd like to do it in the ocean so we could keep his mouth in the salt water for a little bit before we brought him up. And
in love.
Hey, he and Linda both put away the pornography when you were up there.
That's right. But yes, I think we could help Sean with that issue. I think we have the answers that he's looking for.
Amen.
And also,
Hey, I have to sleep at night. This is a family show, Pat.
and also he wouldn't have to be alone with your color, Sean. You could come join us. Where we have a multinational presence.
Amen.
And you could feel well at home with our rainbow, if you will, in our congregation.
I'd be happy to add the medium.
But we do appreciate the hospitality and appreciate that very much. What I appreciate in what I found with many atheists and what I don't find with many religious people is often there's the willingness to live to the core of what they do believe. And I appreciate that. If the belief is wrong, if the intentions are right, I agree with him that it will lead to Jesus Christ. And I hope maybe we can be the instrument of that.
Well,
Positive and negative.
so many words, but not right now. At this end, I'm afraid that we have to wrap things up today. I'd like to thank you all for your participation. And I'd particularly like to thank our panelists here. So let's give them a round of applause, by the way. I mean, for their time, effort. Thank you very much. Before we adjourn, Sean has some very important comments about the after party. I don't know what type of party you're talking about there, which you're all invited to attend.
Before you do that, a big round of applause for Roy, who I think did a fantastic job.
It is going to be a family-friendly party, by the way. Much more family-friendly than our discussion so far.